Hey guys, welcome back to IDP Plus Trends. I'm one of your co-hosts, Johnny Freakin Fantasy. You can find me on Twitter at Johnny Freakin F1. I am joined by my co-host, as always, Steve, Average Joe's _ FF. Steve, how you doing tonight, man?
I am good. I'm getting over this cold, this flu, but I am good. I'm ready to go. I don't have my Batman voice. I think that would have been cool, but I'm ready to go.
Thanks for pushing through, man. Trying to stay consistent, get our viewers and listeners good content. Man, what a time. We were talking about last podcast, a lot of free agent moves are coming, and boy, did they. Man, I mean, people were getting re-signed. Justin Matabuke, as of 2 hours ago, went from franchise tag to getting signed. So a bunch of news. Right now it is Friday night. A lot of news will come into the weekend. So we'll give you what we have right now, what's happened, what's changing, not only on offense, but also in IDP land too. Right now we're going to talk about free agents, both offense and defense, players who signed, players who got the franchise tag, players who signed elsewhere, and players who got cut. And I'm not going to talk every player, but ones that Steve and I narrowed down to be, fantasy factors, guys who matter, looking at not only a dynasty perspective, but a redraft perspective too. So the first segment we're going to break into is going to be wide receiver free agent news. We got some big news with some franchise tags. Michael Pittman, 26 years old, staying back in Indianapolis for another year with the franchise tag. Also, T. Higgins at 25 years old. Looks like he's going to be locked up for one more year as of right now, at least, in Cincinnati, if a trade doesn't happen, right, with these guys. But Pittman looks pretty locked in, and Higgins, hopefully he stays one more year. I think these guys pick up where they left off. I mean, especially Pittman, 23 targets those first two games with Richardson. Steve, you with me on that? You think these guys are, doesn't it change in the rankings?
Yeah, I don't think anything changes. I'm high on both of them. I know obviously Higgins gets treated as the wide receiver 2 behind Jamar Chase, which is completely understandable. He could be a wide receiver 1 almost anywhere else. But with that said, there's still a possibility that these guys do get traded. I think Higgins has a higher chance of getting traded than Pittman. Because I think Pittman, I think there's a mutual agreement that both him and Indy want each other. And they're excited to kind of see what happens, especially with, a healthy Richardson coming in. So I believe there's some excitement there. I love Pittman. I'm a huge Pittman fan. And again, there's no reason for him not to resign. I think they're just trying to figure out the whole money situation and getting that going. Higgins is a little different. I think Higgins does want to stay, but I think Higgins also would be open to trading if the money isn't quite right, because he does want to get his fair share. He was the wide receiver 1 that one little year before Chase comes in and takes over. And, let's be honest, since he's going to pay Jamar Chase, like that's Joe Burrow's boy. Like, they came into this league kind of together. Like, that's not going to change. So it's really going to be like, how can they make this happen? Boyd, their other receiver, obviously we're not going to talk a lot about. He's going to have to go. And if they're going to keep Higgins, so that would be something they're going to have to sacrifice. And then again, nothing as of any breaking news or any really concrete news, but there's a possibility of Joe Mixon being gone if Higgins is signed to a pretty good contract. So there's a lot of ramifications. So who knows? And this is a very deep wide receiver class. We'll touch a little bit about that with the combine that happened, but if Higgins is gone, I mean, they could still fill somebody in there. So I think he has to sign though.
Yeah. You know what? Higgins is probably safer, I'd say, in redraft right now. Dynasty, you might be a little bit scared. What's going to happen next year at least, right? Maybe they don't resign him. It's far from a guarantee. So Dynasty, maybe that's a tip your hat to say, he might find a different landing spot soon, for better or worse, right? T. Higgins is the number 2 receiver. My opinion on this guy is, the grass doesn't always get greener. Some people will say, I want to see him step up and be a number 1. I get it. When in the playoffs last year, he was a dog. He could be that number 1. But at the same time, he's had some injuries, right? So Do you really want that guy being the focus, being on a shutdown corner? I think Jamar Chase really does a nice job of opening up looks for T. Higgins. As long as the numbers aren't affected too much this year, I think, the arrow is still up, especially in redraft for T. Higgins. And I like him in Dynasty too, but it'll be interesting to see what does happen there in Cincy with Mixon, Tyler Boyd. Hopefully Steelers can latch on to him, hometown guy. I've actually met Tyler Boyd, so real cool guy. Love to have him. Awesome. Yeah. Awesome. 2 guys to be franchise tag. Well-deserved. They're going to make some good money this year. We also had another big name who got re-signed. 2 we'll talk about, but the first one's really a big name, and that's Mike Evans, man. Model of consistency, only 30 years old. Feels like he's been in the league longer than 10 years, man, but he's only 30. And I say that with importance to the fact that of all 10 of those years, he's had 1,000 receiving yards, which is very impressive, NFL record. I just got asked the question before he resigned, do I think Mike Evans could be better elsewhere? And my answer was no. And Mike Evans, I want to say thank you, sir, for not leaving, because when you have 10-year stretch like that, you don't go elsewhere, because it's not going to end well no matter where you are. He could be a great player elsewhere, could help a team win a Super Bowl, maybe helping Tampa Bay win a Super Bowl if they can lock down Mayfield. I really like this re-sign. I think it's a modest, maybe he was going to break the bank a little bit more elsewhere, but they gave him, I think, $26 million a year for those 2 years. Really nice contract for him. Good, well-deserved. And Mike Evans, I think he really picks up where he left off last year. How about you, Steve?
Yeah. If he had left, I would have been shocked. Like, I would have been so surprised, because I think he wanted to be in Tampa. I think he did want to put the idea of possibly leaving to put a little pressure on them to make sure they pay him, his due money. And I understand, like, hesitant, being hesitant of giving a 30-year-old that type of money, but Mike Evans just plays very, very strong, and he's very healthy. He's consistent. You got to take care of him, even though his age may show differently. I think this was important for them, because for them to lock in Baker, I think they needed Mike Evans. And I think that was a big factor too. And I think part of Mike Evans signing was, I think he also wants Baker there too. So I think there's that form of agreement that obviously hasn't happened yet for Baker Mayfield, but I think that's going to happen soon before we know it. But this is a huge one. And Mike Evans, absolutely. And I see this a lot. I've seen it on my timeline. People kind of going back and forth. Is he a Hall of Famer? Yes. Just stop arguing. He's a Hall of Famer. Call it what it is. That's it.
I'm with that, man. I think so too. Breaking NFL records, just doesn't matter who his quarterback is. He has a good situation with Baker there. Baker's not afraid to throw the ball. It's not like you got 5 guys who are getting the ball thrown to them. Really, it's Godwin. They do have that, I think, Palmer and Tompkins, they're minor roles, but between him, Godwin, and Otton there, they really got a good system flowing and volume too. So, man, Mike Evans, bulletproof at 30 years old. Really like him. Another guy I wanted to talk about here, mention at least, especially for dynasty purposes, was Demarcus Robinson. We saw him kind of pick it up. Really had it, and this is something I'll say, man. Like, I really am happy that Mike Evans didn't go to a team like Kansas City, because they spread the ball around so much. But Demarcus Robinson, maybe he was a byproduct of that system, wasn't really able to shine. But I don't know, call it the St. Louis Rams effect or whatever you want to call it, LA Rams, excuse me. But Demarcus Robinson, 29 years old, weeks 13 through 17 this year. He had 4 touchdowns. That was 4 straight games with touchdowns and 21 catches over that 5-week period. He kind of had a big role there as the number 3 receiver. And we don't see number 3 receivers do this very often, have a stretch of 4 games with a touchdown. And I'm not exactly sold on the fact that that's going to happen next year off the bat. I'm really not focusing him on redraft. In redraft, it would kind of be a wait and see approach for me. If he really does pop off, maybe if Kupp gets hurt, if Puka gets hurt, then at that point, Demarcus Robinson becomes a very valuable pickup. But definitely not a guy not to ignore in Dynasty. Only 29 years old, only getting more rapport with Stafford. Stafford might not be there beyond next year, but if we're talking about next year specifically, Demarcus Robinson is a cheap option. He's shown his stretch run. He can make noise. He can do it, right? So number 3 receiver is an outlier to have fantasy significance. I think Robinson can do that, at least as a stream play next year. Steve, what do you think about Robinson?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely would have to be on some deeper leagues. Like, you're not going to do this on a 10-man league, because obviously there's no way he's on your roster. But if you're in a 12, It's a 14-team league. You've got some deep rosters. You got like 3 wide receiver plus some flex options. Sure, there's also obviously a chance that Robinson may play a role here or there. And again, like you mentioned, if you've got an injury, Cooper Kupp, I hate to say it, but he's had some injuries he's had to deal with, which has put Robinson in those situations to succeed as the wide receiver too. So yeah, his value is definitely stronger. So Dynasty, definitely there. Redraft, you're not even thinking about him at all, unless you're doing some like crazy 36-man type of scenarios. So redraft, definitely no value. Dynasty with more of a deeper roster or maybe a deeper team type of situation, then sure, he can fill in a game or two if needed, especially when you're looking at the injury aspect with these wide receiver core, like again, Kupp, man, you got to stay healthy. You had that triple crown, and then all of a sudden he's kind of faltered due to some injuries. And when he's getting up there in age, that tends to happen a little bit more often. So Robinson has some value there for sure.
Absolutely, man. That was for the wide receivers. Again, we have franchise tags, Pittman, Hit, and Higgins, and then we got re-signs, Mike Evans, Demarcus Robinson. Before we move into running backs, I wanted to mention to our viewers and listeners, idpplus.com. You might have heard it as idpguys.org. We are switching over, making the official switch to idpplus.com. So we're the IDP Plus team. If you aren't subscribed already to our content, go to idpplus.com. When you check out for a 1-month subscription, use the promo code MOCKDRAFT. You will get that first month of content for only $1. So again, that's IDP Plus, as in PLUS, no plus sign, idpplus.com. Check out for a 1-month subscription, and you get that first month for only $1. And we have had a lot of content coming out, whether it be speculation on free agents, combine, statistics, combine winners and losers. Steve, you did an article on winners and losers, right?
Yeah, we did. I did day 3 and 4 of the combine. So there's some great content of, what happened. I watched a lot of combine. I watched a lot of, how these guys perform. So some great articles there that I hope to kind of put out there for IDP Plus. Another thing that we don't, again, especially with the IDP portion, which is what makes us stand out, for that $1, you're getting a lot in there. You can join our Discord. We can help answer your lineup questions when we get to the season, helping you with scoring. We've got a great article coming out for IDP scoring if you're going to start a new league, right? And you're kind of interested in it. So there's a lot of great content you have access to help you guys out, especially when it comes to the IDP. And the fact that now we're plus, we're going to talk a lot of offense as well to get you well-rounded for your season coming up.
No doubt. Absolutely. So if you haven't, one more time, IDP PLUS, idpplus.com. Use the promo code MOCKDRAFT for that $1 first month subscription. Now moving into our running backs, man. Steve, we got a lot of good meaty running backs out here. Saquon Barkley, rumblings that he's not going to re-sign. Be interested to see what happens with him. Derrick Henry, Tony Pollard, Josh Jacobs, Austin Eckler. A lot of meat on the bone, right? Man, I mean, probably this time next week, we're going to be talking about these guys, where they landed. Do you think that any of these big time guys re-sign, or do you think, they're all headed elsewhere? Maybe not all, but majority.
Yeah. So looking at kind of the big 5, right? Cause there's a couple others but the big 5 that we were talking about here that really have been some outstanding fantasy players for a lot of you guys, and myself included. I think the only one that might actually re-sign would be Tony Pollard. I thought as a Cowboy fan they were going to move on, but there's a chance they keep him because he's willing to take a discount to kind of stay for the team. So there's a possibility because right now Derrick Henry is essentially pretty much nixed the idea of coming back to Tennessee. Eckler, that's an interesting one because you've got a new regime there with Harbaugh. Maybe he gets re-signed, but I think of those 5, Pollard's the only one that I think actually re-signs with the original team.
Well, we got 2 more to add to the list, and they're not pretty. They're not household names, or I should say big fantasy implication names, but Nyheim Hines and Alexander Mattison. We talked about Mattison last week. These guys were cut. They are free agents as well. Mattison, I'm going to go back, and confirm what I had said before. If you have him in Dynasty, he's 25 years old. You might want to see where he lands. I don't think he's going to get a role where he's, getting 10 or more touches off the bat. Maybe it takes an injury for him to get significant playing time. But Alexander Mattison, 25 years old, we saw him have a nice year 2 years ago. Saw glimpses. He didn't have a rushing touchdown this past year. Really had a rough year. Somebody who you're not going to draft and redraft, probably doesn't get a big contract or anything more than a prove it deal. But Alexander Mattison, if you're in a deep dynasty league, I think it's fair to say you can hang on to him to see where he goes. What do you think, Steve?
Yeah, I was never sold on him. I think we've talked about this in the past. I thought he was more of a stopgap kind of, backup role, fill in a game here or there, maybe some backup touches. So his value is definitely diminished, and last year kind of was his year to prove it. And unfortunately, as you can see, Minnesota was ready to move on. They liked Chandler a lot more. Just for some advice, again, take it as you may, but I will say I moved on from Chandler already, because even that I'm not completely sold out on. I just think they're going to I think Minnesota goes after a running back like one of these free agents we talked about. And then when it comes to these free agent running backs, if you're in a team that, especially in Dynasty, if you're trying to win and you have some assets, like this is a good time to get some of these players, like get a Barkley, get a Jacobs, like get some of these players at a pretty good price right now. Because some of these owners may have them, not sure where they're going to land, not sure what to do with them, may end up selling them at a decent price where you can get, a potential top, 5 to 10 fantasy back coming up this season because someone's kind of unsure. They're not really sure. They'd rather go with the youth, or like right now we talked rookie, mania. Everyone's going crazy for the rookies from the combine. Everybody wants young draft picks. Like, oh, I want. Again, might be worth it. Maybe you've got the 107, 108. You've got some depth at receiver. Let me go get a running back. Maybe trade one of those for, a Barkley or a Jacobs if you have the ability to do that. So don't be afraid to let some of your assets go for some of these proven vets, because there aren't really amazing running backs in this draft. There might be a few, that might stand out, but it's not like Bijan or Jahmyr Gibbs. Like it's not the type of talent like it was last year. So running backs will be tough to build through the draft. Get these free agents, right? And Mattison, sorry, but you're off my team. Boot him. Don't hold on.
I feel you, Steve. How about the next guy? 27 years old. A little bit of irony with Nyheim Hines. I thought he was a good passing back, quick guy.
Yeah.
It was, to me, the ironic part was he got traded for Zach Moss to Buffalo, and Zach Moss ended up being the better player, right? So yeah. Nyheim Hines, he had a little role there. He could do well. I don't know that he'll be a guy I'm touching in redrafts at all. Probably not. But in a deep dynasty, I think Nyheim Hines, to see where he goes. He's now a free agent. I think it's interesting with him. I don't expect him to be a lead back anywhere, but he might have some sneaky PPR value. What do you think about Hines?
Yeah, it definitely depends on where he goes. Obviously, he's dealing with that injury, which, definitely a factor you consider, coming off. Could he play in a role where you've got a bruiser, as your starting back, and then you need someone to kind of fill in? Yeah, definitely he can be, in that type of situation. Like I think of like Arizona, as odd as it is, like you've got like a James Conner who takes a lot of beatings, but then you can add a Nyheim Hines to kind of relieve him and get a few passes here and there in an offense that potentially could have a Marvin Harrison Jr. on the outside. Like it's not a bad way to go. Like, yeah, and where he lands will be a big factor. People still value him. A lot of people I have a buddy who's a big Buffalo fan. He was kind of upset that Hines gone. Like he actually liked him. He was excited to have him on the team, and they just, again, the injury kind of shortened his season, but so there are people who still would love to see him, shine in the NFL. So I wouldn't quite give up on in Dynasty if you can, afford to keep him there. But yeah, redraft, absolutely no value at this point.
Right. But it's been a short, besides those franchise tags, Mike Evans, Robinson, and, Hines, we got to stretch it out a little bit because guys haven't been signed yet. So we're diving deep right now. Hopefully we won't talk about these guys in a week when these big guys get signed, but we're putting our best foot forward, giving you some sneaky plays here. Moving into, it seems like the tight end position. We're going to move into tight ends. A lot of switching the roles here. A lot of, turnover. We got guys getting cut, guys getting signed. Tight end, man. First started off, I mean, we had Zach Ertz. We saw him. He's 33 years old. He get a nice contract with Washington. He had a nice year 2 years ago in Arizona. I mean, I think Zach Ertz. They cut Logan Thomas, who was not young himself. He's 32 also. But I like the Zach Ertz signing. Hopefully they use the tight end a little bit more there in Washington. But sub out Logan Thomas, bring in Zach Ertz. I like that signing, Steve. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm not sure what to take of this because you had Logan Thomas, who, was a year younger, but he's had some injury concerns. Then you bring in Zach Ertz, who's had some injury concerns. I'm not sure what Washington's doing. Like, as a Cowboy fan, I'm loving it. Like, you can keep creating some old players who don't know how to stay on the field. I'm all for it. But as far as an actual tight end goes, Zach Ertz is the better tight end, especially when you saw what his career was like before. The injuries in his, I think he had a little bit of a, revival when he went to Arizona for that brief stint, but I'm not sure. I think obviously Washington is trying to put some veteran aspect into their offense because realistically, let's be honest, they're going to get a rookie quarterback who's going to need that leadership outside of, his coaching staff. Like, you're going to need some of these vets on this line with him, some vets in the outside like McLaurin, and Zach Ertz, who are going to help him and kind of get situated in the NFL. So I think that's a good signing when it comes to that aspect. I don't know how much value he's going to have in fantasy. Like right now, like if I were to do a quick rankings as far as like redraft or even dynasty, like I don't think he even makes it into my tight end 20 mark yet. Like it would be really tough for me to put him there looking at what's out there. So it's a little bit tough to say. I kind of liked Logan Thomas. I actually thought Washington was going to go a different route at the tight end position. So they kind of surprised me when they went Zach Ertz. I think that kind of surprised a lot of people. But I don't hate it for the mentorship as far as what he can bring to that offense because they are trying to make and change this culture in this team. So I get it. And it makes sense, but I'm not in love with either move.
Right. Probably not a guy, in Dynasty. You might get a stream out of him for a year, Zach Ertz. Might have some good games. Logan Thomas had some good games there himself, kind of fizzled off in the later part of the year. It doesn't seem like Washington's a team that throws the tight end that much, especially when they have all those receivers. So I don't expect much volume. But Zach Ertz, good track record for half a season, a year. Yeah, I think he can provide some decent value. I'd agree with you, though, not in that top 20. But definitely if you're a zero tight end drafter, maybe this is a guy who, if you picked up Logan Thomas last year, if you're not high on the tight end, he might be able to be a stopgap for you. The next guy might have some dynasty appeal. We talked about on our last podcast being cut from Atlanta. That's Jonnu Smith. He's only 28 years old. I really like this signing because for him, he's kind of a quick guy. He's a bigger guy. He's a tight end. He can block too, but yeah, he's pretty quick for the position overall. 28 years old. I think this is a good signing for Miami, and I should have seen this one coming, man. He's quick. They're quick. They need a tight end, right? They don't have much at tight end. I think they have Durham Smythe as their number one before he came. I don't expect too much volume with the other guys around, Waddle and Hill, but at the same time, I think this guy could have a better year than tight ends previously have had in Miami. And to me, I think this is maybe somebody who breaks that top 20. Steve, what do you think about Jonnu Smith?
Yeah, I will say he can definitely, I think he can sneak into the top 15 aspect. I think, again, what he showed, even with the little stint that he did with Atlanta last year, I know it was a weird, wonky season with Arthur Smith, but I think there's definitely some possibility he can actually shine. He will be open more often, right? You've got Tyreek and Waddle on the outside. You've got the speed behind you in Mostert and Achane, right? You've got to concern yourselves with that. And that leaves, Jonnu is the odd man out, which is the benefit for him, right? When defenses are focusing on all these other weapons that the Dolphins have, I think Jonnu is going to actually be a surprise and end up being like a top 15 tight end. Could even squeak into the top, 12 or so, depending on what your league is like. He may be somebody you might want to put into your lineup. We'll see how things play out. Again, rookie drafts, free agent signings, and stuff like that. But I think this is a big move for Dolphins, big move for Jonnu. Definitely his values changed for sure, and in the good way.
Yeah, I mean, he went somewhere where he had Kyle Pitts to contend with, and that kind of watered down Pitts' value. But now really, if Durham Smythe can be more of the blocking tight end and there's open looks for Jonnu, I think he has a better year than he did last year. Absolutely. Maybe a guy who you're sending a trade out, right? Maybe a last round pick, something like that. You can get Jonnu Smith, 28 years old. If you're somebody who's high on David Njoku, I think he might be 28 or 29 himself. So maybe a kind of a poor man's David Njoku, someone who can make that leap like later in their career. So yeah, Jonnu Smith definitely draws our attention, rightfully so. Then we go out to two re-signs here. We got Dalton Schultz. So there goes our Brevin Jordan talk from last year, right? Dalton Schultz, 27 years old. I think it's great. You know, it's a great signing for re-signing for Houston. It's nice to see some consistency there. Bring back a guy who's familiar. I really like this guy. I think he's in his prime at 27. Dalton Schultz, you know, that's another team that spreads the ball out well. But Dalton Schultz has his. He gets his, and he has some big games on his belt. In Dallas and in Houston now. And like I said, 27 years old for Dynasty, especially. I like this guy a lot. It might come at a little cheaper tag compared to, you know, these young tight ends that we've seen come in this year. You're gonna have to pay a high price tag with them. Got another good couple rookies from this rookie class. Bowers himself, right? So it seems like the tight end position is getting a little bit deeper. So maybe guys like Jonnu Smith and Dalton Schultz are being overlooked. Steve, I like Dalton Schultz to kind of repeat what he's done this year, if not get better with another year under his belt with Houston. How about you?
Yeah, I like the move. I think it's good for him. I think it's good for CJ Stroud. It's good for this offense. Because again, realistically, if you think about it, again, most quarterbacks, their favorite targets tend to be the tight end, especially when they're in sticky situations, trying to get a first down, even some red zone action. You know, you look for the tight end. So Schultz is definitely going to, you know, have the ability to be a top 10 tight end coming into the season, having another year under this offense, another year with CJ Stroud. So him securing the bag and kind of getting that multi-year contract was huge for him, which now allows, again, Houston to focus on other things, maybe adding a third receiver, maybe focusing on getting that defense, offensive line, you know, different things to kind of get this team overall in a better situation, because they did really well from a team that was projected to not do anything to now being a playoff, pretender, and from a pretender to a contender. So like Schultz, I love. I don't know if I probably put him in the top 5. I think when you're looking at what's out there, but I definitely think he'd be a top 10. You probably lost your chance of trading for him now. His value is now at its highest. So you're probably going to see if some people probably put him up for a firm the trade block to try to see what they can get for him. But as far as Dynasty goes, I think your buy window kind of ended pretty quickly with that signing, because everyone does believe that, you know, he can be a top 10 without any issues at all.
Fair enough. Right. And maybe in a startup, if you're doing a dynasty startup, that's one chance you have to get him, you know, for the cheaper. Like we said, there's a lot of young tight ends, good tight end class up here this year. So Dalton Schultz, definitely looking to repeat, if not get better. I think that's a great thing for Houston as a team to keep that consistency. They were very close to going all the way last year. Hopefully things stay the same on the defensive side of the ball for the Texans too. But yeah, these guys, Dalton Schultz, Jonnu Smith. We're going to talk about another guy who may be able to repeat a year. Hunter Henry just got re-signed, 29 years old. He had some glimpses. I mean, when he played the Steelers, he had 2 touchdowns. Man, that one hurt. Hunter Henry, I don't know what they're going to do outside of him. You know, what other tight ends they have. But one thing that's going in Hunter Henry's favor is they really, as of right now at least, don't have much receiver help, right? And if they get a young quarterback, looks like they're done with Mac Jones. If they choose to draft a quarterback, I mean, I hear rumblings of Jacoby Brissett making an appearance there in Foxborough. Maybe good for the team in general, but if they do decide to go younger, hey, even if they do decide to go Brissett, maybe the tight end, kind of like Steve was saying before, gets that soaks up targets, stopgap, kind of dump off. Hunter Henry, I mean, I like this guy a lot with the Chargers when he was younger. He's not really old yet. He's 29. Probably not somebody who's going to really excite me in redraft. When we talk about Dynasty, you know, somebody who maybe a second tight end, somebody who can stream when somebody's on a bye week or if an injury pops up. I don't think there's a heavy price tag on Hunter Henry. But the fact that he got re-signed for 3 years, I think he improves off this year, Steve. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I'm curious. There's a lot of uncertainty when it comes to the New England Patriots, right? You don't know who the quarterback's going to be. They have a high draft pick, so you're expecting a rookie to kind of come into this situation. They don't have a great receiving core, right? So that's a certain thing you've got to deal with. And then on top of that, you don't know how this new coaching regime really goes, right? Like you've got a lot of consistency from the previous, Bill Belichick coaching tree. So you expect some similarities, which let's be honest, they love the tight end position. So Hunter Henry has an opportunity to do well. I don't know where to quite put him in my rankings. I do think he's someone you could buy at a really cheap price and that might surprise you and have some good games because he has shown that in the past where he's done, he's had a game where he's a top number one tight end. You're like, where did he come from? Because he has that capability, right? Like people forget when he played for the Chargers, he was actually a good tight end. So the abilities there. I want to see more of what this draft looks like and what ends up happening with these quarterbacks, the little bit that are available for free agency, before I feel a little bit more comfortable and confident in him because I think Henry could squeak into the top 15, just depending on what this, quarterback situation plays out. Because I do think, maybe they sign a quarterback and they use their top pick to get like a Marvin Harrison, right? Shock the world, right? So New England could go many ways. And until then, I think I'm kind of holding on to him if I can, maybe buy him cheap. I don't know if you're going to get a lot of value right now at the selling opportunity, but we'll see how this plays out. But I do like him in Dynasty for sure. Redraft, a lot more information is needed before we kind of even consider him.
Right. But at the same time, you slept on right now, especially in redraft,
Absolutely.
right? So if you're starting up, and again, if you're at that zero tight end, you don't want to invest. Maybe somebody who can get you a decent week, every other week. He has his blow up games, and he was. I agree with you, man. He was a good tight end, and for the Chargers. So I definitely think that 29 years old, he has some good days ahead of him too. That's it for our re-signing right now, but we do have 3 players who got cut. I don't think any of these guys have significance, but I'll mention them because it's news. Steve, tell me if you think anything different. We got Will Dissly, only 27 on one hand, so there is potential there. I just don't know if there's opportunity for Will Dissly. We got CJ Uzomah and Logan Thomas, both over 30 themselves. Do you think any of those guys can carve out value anywhere elsewhere?
No, I think Logan Thomas was probably the most talented of those 3 tight ends, and even with him, I don't know if any of them really get any opportunities to be signed. I just don't know if it's going to really happen. So I think realistically at this point, if you were to drop them in your dynasty league, I wouldn't be mad at you, and you probably
Right.
wouldn't regret it either. And there wouldn't be any problems at all because there are a couple tight ends coming into this draft that are pretty good. We're still waiting to see where some of these other tight ends get signed, right? That are coming into the free agency class starting Tuesday. So unfortunately, these 3 are kind of left behind and have really no value at this point.
Right. All right, awesome. Well, we're going to move into our IDP section, but before we do that, we had mentioned before, Steve, you did a lot of coverage on those later draft days. Those later combine days. I want you to give our viewers and listeners right now some I don't know if I want to say risers and fallers, but some people who impressed you as you were watching the combine. A couple players, maybe from a couple of different positions, who really made you take heed of what they did.
Yeah, so I really got about 5 players that I kind of want to mention. 2 are going to be on the defensive side, and then 3 on the offensive side. So, watching the combine, you get to see a lot of guys in shorts, and you always perform differently, right? So don't take everything from the combine and just like that's the way it's got to be. But there were some things that really kind of validated what I watched when I watched some film of some of these players. My first player that I want to mention is Michael Penix Jr. Dude, this kid is just getting slept on. I am super excited to see what he's going to look like in the NFL. I don't know if he's going to get a starting gig this year, but I do think a team, especially a team with like a veteran presence that is possibly going to need someone to back up and be the future, absolutely, I think will love this kid. His arm, the spiral, I mean, just very talented kid, looked great in Washington last year. Obviously, he didn't get the result he wanted in the national championship, but Penix Jr., absolutely just amazing talent. He looked good in the combine. He just validated what I saw on game film. So definitely somebody that I think will fall in the draft, but will be someone's favorite quarterback in years to come. Another is going to be Marshawn Lloyd from USC, the running back. Not a lot of amazing running backs coming into this class like there was last year, but there are still some good ones that I think some teams can get in the mid to late second, maybe third round that will have value even in fantasy, whether it be redraft or dynasty, more so on the dynasty side. That I think will have some value. And Marshawn Lloyd is that guy for me. He looked great in the bag drills. He looked great feet. His movement, his hands looked really good. I just was really impressed with him. And then the last player on the offensive side is Keon Coleman from Florida State. Didn't impress a lot of people with his 40, which kind of turned some people off. Even if you look at my article, which I encourage you to read because I went through a lot of players, I put him as kind of a loser because that is going to affect his stock. But I don't think it's going to affect him as the player. He looked really good. He was the fastest gauntlet player, which last year's fastest gauntlet player was Puka Nacua, and I'm not saying Keon Coleman's going to be that guy, but Keon Coleman has the ability to be an absolute great receiver, especially a really good wide receiver 2 off of a really top wide receiver 1. So I really look forward to him. And then as far as defense, Braden Fisk, look, he's one of my favorites. Obviously, again, another Florida State guy. He looked great everywhere. I think he's the poor man's Chris Jones. He can play inside. He can play outside. He's got great leverage. He knows how to use the blockers and move them. And then another player is Cedric Gray from North Carolina, the linebacker. Great feet. He's able to crash down the line. He knew how to move around the bag drills really well. He just looked super athletic. His hips didn't look too tight. He knew how to move in and out of coverages when he had to. So I thought he's going to be another player that can sneak into possibly a late second, early third round in the NFL draft, which gives him some draft capital. And I think he'll be some of a value as well.
Awesome, man. I appreciate it. If you haven't checked out Steve's articles, go to idpplus.com. Check them out. Great contents. If you follow me on Twitter, I've been retweeting them because it's great stuff. Steve's done a great job. Looking forward to keep doing this podcast with you. Thank you for dropping that rookie knowledge on us. Before we move into IDP, I just want to say, if you haven't got a trophy from trophysmack.com yet, check them out. They're dope. Good trophies there, good belts, good rings on us, on IDP Plus. Even though the promo is old, it's IDP Guys. But when you use the promo code IDP Guys for trophysmack.com, when you buy a belt or a trophy, you get a free ring when you use that promo code IDP Guys at trophysmack.com. So check that out. Steve, we're going to move into our IDP section of free agency now. We're going to first talk about the defensive back position. I know we talked about this guy extensively before, but everyone's favorite right now, Antoine Winfield Jr. You've heard me say before about the position of defensive back, very volatile. I don't think I'm going to invest in any of these guys who got franchise tagged, but the first one being Antoine Winfield Jr. Don't get me wrong, 25 years old. Great to see him return, like what Tampa Bay is doing there. Probably their best defensive player. But at 20 to 25 years old, he's put all the pieces together. He's in his prime. I get that. 122 tackles, that's tremendous. 6 sacks, tough to produce, tough to reproduce. 6 forced fumbles, that's insane. 12 tackles for loss. 6 tackles for loss and 12 pass defense. This guy lit it up this year. Don't get me wrong. If you had him, you were riding the wave. He's a great player. Probably will be for the rest of his career. He can play anywhere on the defense. But the thing with Antoine Winfield being that just that position is so volatile, we got some guys later that we'll talk about who got re-signed and get some guys who got cut even, who I think when they eventually get signed, their price tag is just cheaper, straight up. Antoine Winfield, you're going to pay the premium tag on him. It's just a tough thing to reproduce. He wasn't even a top 20 defensive back the last 2 years. So to me, as much as Antoine Winfield is hyped up this offseason, and it's great to see him return for the Bucs in real life, sure. To me, I'm just not going to, unless you're in a startup and people are kind of have the same mindset, volatile. I just don't get, paying the tag for whether it be trade or draft with Antoine Winfield. Steve, what do you think?
So this year, yeah, I kind of feel the same way. So I will say I have had, at least in redraft status, in my last 2 years in redraft, I have been getting either Minkah Fitzpatrick or Antoine Winfield. Like those are my two defensive backs that I've always held on my redraft teams because they both have been really good at producing and they've done a really good job. Now, again, everyone's scoring is quite different. Most of my scoring has been geared towards obviously tackling matters, but big plays, pass deflections, interceptions, things like that. So these guys have great value. So Winfield has absolutely been phenomenal. I am mad for him that he didn't get Defensive Player of the Year. I thought it was kind of crazy because of the way he did really perform for the Tampa Bay Bucks last year. So kind of disappointing there. But yeah, this year he is going to be a name that will be drafted pretty high in redrafts. Even in startups, he'll probably be drafted pretty high when it comes to IDP standard. So it's not quite worth it because of where you're going to end up getting him. He may not produce as well. So it's tough when it comes to that. Like, had you talked about the last couple of years where he hasn't really hit the number that he just did, like because of what he was able to do, and now essentially, if you look at as far as an NFL, like the NFL always does their top 100 players. I guarantee you, Winfield will be in the top 20 this year. The way people are going to vote, and his value is going to be at his all-time high, meaning he is going to be hard to draft at a good value. So he is one of those players that maybe if he falls to you, grab him, but he's going to be tough. And he's going to be tough to sell. And I wouldn't quite sell him in Dynasty. Like I would still just hold on to him because I don't know if you get enough value back in return. So I would just kind of hold on to him, but because he's not a bad player at all. Like he's still going to perform. But as far as if you're talking redraft right now, he will be the first defensive player as far as defensive back off the board. And depending on how your league goes, he might get drafted really early, and I'd rather go somewhere else.
Absolutely, man. High price tag you're gonna have to pay. Sure, could have a great season again, hoping for that. But I don't think he repeats. It's tough to repeat as the best defensive back. Wouldn't be surprised, but at the same time, 6 sacks, that's tough to repeat. Another guy who got our actual second safety, I should say, the other two are cornerbacks. The second safety who got a tag, it was a transition tag. I think it was a smart move by the Patriots there. Shout out to New England. But Kyle Duggar, he returns there at least for another year. I think this is a great signing. I wouldn't like Kyle Duggar if he went somewhere else. I'd be more of like a wait and see, drafting him or trading for him. But I mean, what he's done so far in his couple years in Foxborough, I think you're going to get that again. I mean, he at times was volatile this year, had a couple down weeks, but had a couple spike weeks where he was over 10 tackles, right? And by the end of the season, he's going to be up there towards the top of the rankings for safeties. He does it all. He makes plays behind the line. He's getting, actually this year was the most tackles he's had. His record in tackles over 100. So I'm excited for Kyle Duggar to stay. Very happy to hear that. This guy's only 27 years old. Hopefully he stays there long term because I think he's a good fit and one of their better players and a hard hitter. I like Kyle Duggar to pick up where he left off. I still rank him where he was at last year. Steve, you agree?
Yeah, he's definitely going to be like a cheaper option when you look at what's out there. Because we're going to talk about a lot of defensive backs that have been affected this offseason so far. So Duggar's going to be one of those players that you can get at a good rate when it comes to redraft or dynasty. He's going to perform again consistently enough that you're not going to feel like you got burned when you start him. You might have a game here or there, but you're going to put him in your lineup and kind of set and forget type of thing, which is what you want. You want a player that you feel like, all right, if he has one bad week, it's okay, but he's going to have more better weeks than he's going to have a bad week. So, yeah, I don't hate the move. I think it's good for New England that they need it. I think that it's important for them as well when it comes to the Patriots and just kind of solidifying this defense. So I think it's a great move for him. Great move when it comes to redraft and dynasty if you're able to get after him, because I think his name isn't going to be as recognizable as some of these bigger names like a Minka or Antoine Winfield or the next guy we'll talk about. So, yeah, I think it's a good move for everybody.
So, well, those are our two safeties. Moving into the cornerback position, we got L'Jarius Sneed and Jaylon Johnson. Let's first talk about Sneed, 27 years old. Maybe he's looked to, he did get franchise tagged. Maybe they're going to use him as trade bait just to buy some time. I don't exactly foresee him getting another contract. He's getting older at 27. They have McDuffie starting to step up here. I just think this is a placeholder just to keep him on the roster. They need Chris Jones to re-sign him, right? So L'Jarius Sneed, I think he's plays another year. I think, what you got this year, kind of him being on an island, shutting down the best receiver on the other team. I think he didn't allow a touchdown to any receiver he was closest to, right? So that was a great stat for L'Jarius Sneed, and a great year. But you saw the sacks come down because he's kind of asked to stop the best defender, and they have McDuffie who can make some plays himself. So L'Jarius Sneed, I'm not really – if you have him, it's probably a hold. He could probably go somewhere else and be a solid corner as well. But unfortunately, I think the sell high window has passed. Do you agree with that, Steve?
Yeah. If he's on your team already in Dynasty, just keep him. Nothing to do, no move. No, there's really nothing you're going to get for him right now. I would actually be shocked if he does come back to Kansas City, because they've got cap situation they got to figure out still. They're in the positive, which is great news, but they got to sign Chris Jones, and then they've still got to deal with what they're going to do with Snead. So I'm curious if they're going to end up trading him instead. So there might be some value there. So I'm curious. He is definitely a wait and see type of player. If you're talking startup, I think his value is too high. I think he's a name that a lot of people recognize. So I think you could get a better player somewhere else. But if you have him on your team right now, I would just hold on to him and just kind of see what happens.
Right. Definitely a hold right now. Next guy is another corner. And let me just say, if you have L'Jarius Sneed and you're playing a cornerback league, that's more than fine. L'Jarius Sneed as a cornerback is a great option, probably top 3, whether it be redraft or dynasty. Maybe that changes based on what happens in his situation with Kansas City. But this next guy, a lot of people like to talk about him. He's a great player. I just don't think he's a good fantasy player. Not a player I'm going to have on my team, that's for sure, because for me, a lot of my scoring is based on tackles. But outside of a couple splash plays, Jaylon Johnson, and don't get me wrong, I think he's at 24 years old, great player, maybe a franchise cornerstone for the Bears defense. I think they led the league in takeaways, and Jaylon Johnson was a huge part of that. But with only 36 tackles and 4 interceptions, don't get me wrong, 4 interceptions was solid. But 36 tackles when this is not an outlier year where he's had more. He's actually had, I think, less the last 2 years. I'm just not sold on Jaylon Johnson. Big free agent signing, great NFL player, doesn't belong in fantasy lineups. What do you think, Steve?
Yeah, he is a better real life player than he is fantasy for sure. I mean, he got the big contract from Chicago. He was tagged and then got signed, which is great news for him. I thought he was a great talent, and he did a great job kind of doing that prove it type of deal this past season. Again, like you mentioned, he has no real value in dynasty because most of the time you're going to do what is called just defensive backs, not cornerbacks or safeties. So when you're talking, you got to fill a spot for defensive back, you're probably filling it with a safety or a free safety. Then you get into the cornerback world. There's a very few, and it's a very small amount of cornerbacks that I would feel comfortable putting in my lineup every single week. And Jaylon Johnson is not one of them.
Just not one of them, man. Absolutely. Great player, just not my fantasy lineup. We're going to move into our re-signs. We talked about this. This is a big winner for me. Taylor Rapp, we had talked about him in an episode before, said that if he got a chance to start there or really anywhere, things would pick up where they left off when he left the Rams. He was a part-time role player backup this year for Buffalo. We just saw them cut Jordan Poyer. Looks like they might have Micah Hyde for another year. But to me, I think Taylor Rapp is straight up penciled into that lineup. They re-signed him. They gave him a multiple year deal. I think they're invested in him, rightfully so. I really like that signing. 26 years old. To me, what I'm really looking at is over the last 2 years he played for the Rams in 21 and 22. Both of those seasons was over 90 tackles. He had a year with 4 picks, and then the second year was 2 picks. So over those 2 years, 6 interceptions. Not going to say he's going to make sacks or make many tackles for loss. Doesn't really, make many pass deflections, but at the same time, a solid tackler, somebody who can make big plays. Taylor Rapp, I really like this. I think Buffalo's had a good track record of having fantasy IDP prone, in a good way, safeties. And I think Taylor Rapp, man, this is a guy when we talk about the high price tag, you got to pay for Antoine Winfield. Don't do it. Sit back, relax, take all your other IDPs, your offense, and then come back to a player like Taylor Rapp because he's really under the radar right now. And I really would like to draft him in all my leagues if I can. because I just don't see the big significance in the defensive back position. But I do think he is an outlier and great average draft position. Go get. What do you say, Steve?
Yeah, it's funny because when Taylor Rapp got signed, the first person I thought of was you, because we had talked about him. We had talked about what he could possibly do if he was given the starting lineup again. And now with everything that's going on in Buffalo, with them trying to figure out their cap situation, you're looking at a whole new possible secondary, right, for Buffalo. And Taylor Rapp looks like he's got that at least one spot filled for the Bills. So with that said, you've got a starting safety at a value that you probably could have just picked him off waivers. Like, he probably isn't even rostered right now. So you may want to look into your waivers right now and kind of see what's out there, because he has the potential to really be a starting safety this year and give you strong value. Like, he can give you leave him in your lineup. He's going to produce some points and call it a day. So I think it's a great move for Taylor Rapp. I think it's a good move for Buffalo to kind of stay under their cap and have a good player back there. I don't think he's still as good as the players he's going to replace quite yet, but he does have some value when it comes to fantasy.
Absolutely, man. Average over 6 tackles when he got an opportunity to start for the Bills this past year. So, yeah, I'm not worried about a change of scenery from him to L.A. To come to Buffalo. Pencil him in. Great late round pick. Overlooked player. Next guy, we have another guy who re-signed, and that is from the Saints. They cut Marcus May, and there's two guys I want to talk about from New Orleans in the backfield there. So they have Tyran Mathieu. He's 31 years old. He just got extended. I think it was a 2-year deal. To me, he's a well-balanced player. He plays in tackle-heavy leagues. He plays in big play leagues. He averages around 75 tackles. Obviously, he's getting a little bit older. Maybe those numbers fall down a little bit. But, yeah, he got re-signed, and I think he's hungry. He's a great player in real life, and he's good in fantasy too. He's going to get you about 8 to 10 passes defensed. And I really like him. Is another late stab, somebody who you're not going to have to pay a high price tag, especially given his age. And guess what? If things don't work out, you can always find somebody else. But I think Tyran Mathieu, being the returning factor there and being there for such a long time, hopefully he, considers, sticking it out and having another good year. I think he gets tackles and makes some good plays there. I think there's some value, especially in deeper leagues with Tyran Mathieu. What do you think, Steve?
Yeah, he's got some good value. He's obviously up there in age, right, at 31. He's one of our older players that we're going to talk about here, but he's been consistent. That's where he's Mr. Consistent when it comes to the Saints defense. The restructure was big, especially for them to try to, figure out and maintain this salary cap situation that got down in New Orleans. So that was a big move for them. I think it's important, right, because they've got to figure out the secondary. There's possible rumors of Latimer, gone. Who knows? Like, there's a lot going on back there. But Mathieu is their heart and soul now, him and Cameron Jordan of that defense. So I'm glad to see they kept him around for sure.
Absolutely. And the second guy I wanted to mention is his going to be new battering mate. Hopefully, there's a chance, unless they go draft or sign somebody. There was a guy, maybe if you were a deep IDP head and you were scavenging the waiver wire late in the season, you came across the name Jordan Howden. He was very talked up in the IDP community for about a week. In week, I think it was 8, he had an 8-tackle game, which kind of put him on the map. It was like, maybe this guy can step up. Then I think Marcus May came back. Tyran Mathieu was still there. He went back to the bench. Young guy, and that's Jordan Howden. And then we saw him get an opportunity to start in week 14. He had 10 tackles, 7 solos, 3 assists with a sack. In the league I played in, that was good for 25 points. That's really when he became a big name in the community. Unfortunately, I did pick him up, and many others I'm sure did too. I didn't start him just because I wanted to see the proof in the pudding first, and I'm glad I didn't, because things kind of fizzled from there. And probably after that next week, you dropped him, went back to being a bench player. But I think maybe with his Marcus May cut, Jordan Howden could be a good, unheralded player who kind of rises up the rankings. So if you're a zero defensive back strategy guy, maybe Jordan Howden's a name to keep in mind over this offseason, see what shakes up in New Orleans. We also have 4 players who were cut, but we think can have some value elsewhere. Justin Simmons, 30 years old, in Denver. Jordan Poyer, 32. Kevin Byard, 30 years old, and Jamal Adams, 28. And I want to start off by saying this. Justin Simmons, we had talked about Denver in our free agents scope a couple weeks ago. We talked about, things shaking up in Denver. And if something happened like this, PJ Locke is another name to consider. PJ Locke, to me, I think he becomes a starter by default now. And he's only in his mid-20s. I'm really excited to see what PJ Locke, hopefully he steps up and becomes a starter. Just verify that with depth charts beginning of the year. But as of right now, he's penciled in there. PJ Locke, I think, is a great get for later drafters in the defensive back realm. Justin Simmons, I think if he can go somewhere and get signed, maybe a 1 year, maybe a team like Pittsburgh, we have Fitzpatrick. Maybe they need somebody else to kind of play that ball hawking role. Justin Simmons is a solid player. Steve, what do you want to say about Simmons, Poyer, Byard, Jamal Adams, any of these guys who got cut?
So of those players, Simmons is probably the most sought after player. He's the most talented. He was a Pro Bowl player. So I think he's going to be the one that finds the home first. And I think he'll have the biggest value. And I still think he'll have strong value in redraft and in Dynasty. So I wouldn't necessarily get rid of these players. The one player I have actually the least amount of confidence in is going to be Jamal Adams because of all the injuries that have going on. And he's very scheme specific the way he plays. I just don't know. Not to say he doesn't have any value if he goes to the right team. There's just so much uncertainty right now with him. I'm just not sure where I would want to put him anywhere because when he was able to play and he was healthy, he was fantastic. Jamal was hitting people. He was making tackles, making plays. But that just isn't quite the same thing anymore. And unfortunately, him being let go was kind of that, that kind of eye-opening, experience for him. I think it's something he needed anyways. I think he needed to leave Seattle and possibly see what's out there. But he's probably the one I'm kind of least excited about. But Justin Simmons, I am super excited about. Byard was unique, but he just kind of fell off. And then Poyer, I'm not sure what ends up happening with him. There maybe even be talks of him retiring. So, but Simmons, I'm super excited about.
Absolutely. And watch where these guys get signed, redraft, especially because of the age. But at the same time, let me just say this too. Defensive backs, I mean, you might look at a guy like Jordan Battle, somebody who's a rookie. It's really tough to go like wire to wire with career, a defensive back position. I mean, linebacker too. Yeah, it's a volatile position. A lot of guys kind of switch roles, switch teams. We saw like a Drue Tranquill. Look what he was at LA, and then look what he is now in Kansas City. Not to say that better days aren't ahead, but it's tough to have that 10-year career projection at the safety position. So even if you're in a deeper league, an IDP in a dynasty league, these guys are for a startup, for if they're on the waiver wire and they find the right fit, definitely can help you at least a year or two. And we have some good names. I mean, Jordan Poyer was a darling, an IDP darling just a few years ago. He's 32 years old, maybe has a good year in him still. So Kevin Byard, to me though, I want to say this: when he was like in Tennessee, he was somebody that people just hyped up so much, and like the stats really didn't back it up. He was a great player, but really the stats didn't back it up. But when he went to Philly, I really wanted him to stay there. I mean, I think he had a couple top 5 defensive back finishes. It was nice to see him kind of like pad the stats there. Maybe he was just making tackles that, cleaning up the dirty work. I'm not sure exactly what, the byproduct was, but yeah, these guys, if they go to the right situation, they can definitely hit and help you out. So keep in mind, even though they're cut for right now, maybe names that we're talking about, just like we mentioned, Taylor Rapp, all it takes is a signing to the right place for them to become fantasy significant again. Moving into the defensive line position, we have 2 franchise tags and a re-sign. It was almost 3 franchise tags, but then 2 hours ago, we got the news that Justin Matabuke got a 2-year deal. Buku money, I think it was over, 90 million, something like that. 26 years old. Great player. I'm very excited to see. That's what I thought it was that Baltimore was going to retain him. I think this guy just picks up where he left off. Steve, what do you think about Matabuke?
There's a good chance that he does. I have less like when it comes to defensive line, when it comes to fantasy, I really like more the defensive end / hybrid linebacker more than I do like the traditional defensive tackle. Matabuke did a really good job last season. He had an outstanding season for sure. part of me worries a little bit. Like sometimes some players do an amazing job their contract year and then they get the contract and kind of disappear. So not sure if that's going to happen here in Baltimore, because Baltimore does do a great job of holding their players accountable, especially when, they expect you to perform with the paycheck that they just gave you. So we'll see how that plays out. I'm more hesitant with him. I would use him as more of a trade bait than anything else. If you look to get something out there, and you've got some depth behind Matabuke. Now the other two players that we're going to talk about, I value them a lot higher because of what they're capable of doing. We're just not sure what's going to happen with them contract wise.
Right. And those two other franchise tag players were Josh Allen and Brian Burns. Great players. They had good years. Brian Burns, a little bit of a down year for him. I think he was battling injury, but 26 years old for Josh Allen, 25 years old for Brian Burns. Hopefully they re-sign these guys. Franchise tag was a smart move. At least we know as fantasy football managers where they're going to be next year. I think these guys pick up where they left off. Josh Allen, it was really nice to see him hit. I think he had 10.5 sacks his rookie year. Kind of, forgot about, slept on the last couple of years based on performance, rightfully so. But Brian Burns and Josh Allen, really two good players in the peaks of their careers, 25, 26 years old. Like them a lot. Absolutely. Have a lot of confidence in those guys. And finally, our linebackers. We have 2 re-signings and 1 cut, but we think all 3 of these players could provide, a good year of fantasy given with their age. Drue Tranquill is the first re-sign, 28 years old. A lot of people are excited about Drue Tranquill, and I get it. But at the same time, we were excited last year. He had 146 tackles, 5 sacks, 10 tackles for loss in his last year with the Chargers. This year, we saw him become more of a role player. To me, a lot of people are saying he got re-signed. I'm excited when, he covered for Gay or Bolton wasn't there. Maybe Gay doesn't return, right? But at the same time, I just don't – I wouldn't call him like a safe linebacker 2, or anything higher than that. To me, he's just kind of have to, at least in a shallow redraft. If you have him in Dynasty, you're probably holding him. But if you're talking redraft or a startup in Dynasty, I don't know about Drue Tranquill. He might have a good year, especially if injuries hit. But if you look at the track record of the Chiefs, I just don't remember them having 2 solid IDP linebackers. Going back to the Derek Johnson days, he was a banger there, and Nick Bolton's that guy now. But I just don't think there's room really for Drue Tranquill to be a LB2 or more. Maybe 1 week here or there he has that sack. He 8 tackles and a sack. He has that potential, kind of like a Hunter Henry at this position. He can be a top linebacker any given week. It just might take an injury to get there. You just might not see it every week. So dependability. Steve, what do you think? I don't think he's really dependable. I'm excited for the team. Great signing, but in fantasy, I don't really. He's going to have to prove it to me.
Yeah, he is going to be more of a deep stash type of player at this point, as far as like your dynasty goes. He's not redraft relevant at this point, unless you're your deep leagues, 14, 16, 20 man leagues, maybe. And you kind of put somebody in there, but yeah, he had that one good year in for the Chargers, right? He played 16 games. He started in 16 games. But that was the only year he started in 16 games. Last year, he only started in 8. He hasn't really been a true starter in the league. So maybe this is going to change. We'll see how this, training camps can be huge. I want to see more out of training camp. I want to see more of what their depth chart looks like. Maybe even some preseason, right? If he sits more, that's a good thing. That means he's got that starting role. So I'd have to see more before I feel confident in a redraft format. But as far as dynasty, there's no reason to let go of him if you have him. I wouldn't go after him unless maybe it's a cheap, maybe a late 3rd round pick and you don't need anything and you felt, yeah, let me reach out and grab this guy because he could potentially be a starter for the Kansas City Chiefs. But other than that, it's a kind of wait and see type of scenario what they do with him.
Right. Yeah. If you're in a deep dynasty league, you're holding him. Continue to hold him. Maybe the second year he gets more playing time. If an injury happens, great. He's a high upside LB2. But until then, more of a wait and see. Another re-sign is somebody who's kind of flying under the radar right now. And if you're in a deep league, IDP Dynasty and you have Nate Landman from the Atlanta Falcons, 25 years old, got to re-sign. I really liked him. He was an unrestricted free agent. So, it was ultimately likely that he came back to Atlanta, which he did. They have Troy Anderson there, and I like Troy Anderson a lot. Maybe Landman doesn't have to, start. Maybe doesn't have to play as much. But at the same time, if they only roll with if they only roll with Troy Anderson and Nate Landman starting as a second linebacker, I think there is room in this linebacking core. The way they play two linebackers, there's definitely room. They also have Caden Ellis too. He's more of like an edge player, and he gets tackles as well. But if they can find a spot for Nate Landman or an injury happens again, this is somebody who has a high ceiling, again, high upside, LB2, 25 years old. And I don't think the contract was multi-year. It might have been 2 years at the most. But, yeah, Nate Landman, 25 years old, even if he goes somewhere else or he gets traded, or Troy Anderson gets traded, gets hurt again, if he's starting, I don't care if it's in Atlanta, wherever it is, as long as they have two linebackers that start. I like Nate Landman a lot. Did you know? Did you notice this guy in IDP this year, Steve?
Well, he had 110 tackles, which was not bad for somebody who you get some points from that. So he played in 13 games, which was a big deal for him. He played, he started in those 13 games. So he just didn't stand out when it came to like the big plays. So like again, my league is a little bit mixed when it comes to my scoring. So tackles are important, but I need some big plays out of him too. And Land was consistent enough where you knew what you were going to get from him, but not enough to really kind of put you over the edge when you needed a win here or there. Like he wasn't a guy that was going to get you that super, double-digit performance that you're like, man, that guy just won me the game. Like he was consistent enough where you're like, okay, I know I'll get 7-8 points maybe. But it wasn't enough that I felt like he had enough value. So it's tough. I mean, don't get me wrong. I watched him last year. I saw what he was able to do. I had to stream him one time due to injury situation. So and again, he was okay. He didn't give me enough in my league that it was valuable enough for me.
Right. So again, if you're chasing the tackles, there was a couple games, 2 games where Nate Landman had over 10 tackles. So if you're a tackles guy, getting, maybe 1.5 to 2 points per solo tackle, Nate Landman's a name to consider, or if he's out there, pick him up. But other than that, I mean, probably not going to be drafted and redraft right away. I wouldn't be surprised if he comes out and has a starting job and maybe shows out with like a 6 to 8 tackle game week 1, and then we start making waves about Nate Landman. So, keep in mind on him, monitor, see what he's doing in OTAs, see where he's at the depth chart, if he's going to start next to Troy Anderson. Definitely a name to keep on your watch list. And finally, the last player is somebody who got cut, 32 years old. This guy was great. He was a banger in Minnesota for a long time. Eric Kendricks had a decent year, was pretty healthy in LA at 32 years old. I think he can go at least a 1-year contract and be a solid player. Steve, what do you think about Kendricks?
Yeah, Kendricks was a kind of a last minute replacement or release as far as like what we had thought we were going to see. Right. So I don't know what to expect out of this situation with him. So, he's now leaving LA. I'm not sure where he's going to end up landing. That will play a factor. There's talks of, I think like Pittsburgh was a talk. Of course, you're going to hear Dallas a lot, right? Because Dallas is looking for linebackers. I don't know how true that's going to be. So I'm not really sure what that ends up being like because he was a mainstay for Minnesota for the longest, right? He was an amazing linebacker, probably one of the better defensive players when it came to IDP, just because of consistency. But I'm not sure how that's going to play out this year. He still hit over 100 tackles. So it's not like you can't get that out of him again this season. I'm just curious where he'll end up landing. I think that's going to be a big factor for him. So if you have him, you're going to have to hold on to him because I still think he's got some value this upcoming season because I do expect him to be signed. Just don't expect a long term. Like he might get a 1, maybe a 2-year contract out of his new team, and he'll get a starting role, or at least the opportunity to start it. I think he'll get the starting role because of what he's been able to do. But as far as like redraft, it's definitely a wait and see. Like, obviously you shouldn't be doing drafting now, like at all. Please hold off, like wait and see. But if you're in redraft, he might be a nice little steal later in the draft because people will kind of forget about him, right? Everyone knows of him from Minnesota years. Last year, I guarantee you, if I asked people around, any of my friends, they probably were like, "Oh, he played for the Chargers." Like, nobody really knew, right? He was kind of forgotten about when he went to LA.
Yeah, I agree with that, man. And good point. I think he does get a starting job wherever he goes. Just depends on where it is. If he goes to Kansas City and they're playing one linebacker, or if he's going to the Rams and they're playing one linebacker, tough to make some noise there, right? But if he goes to the right team, definitely can have some value, especially 1 year. Might struggle to stay healthy at 32 years old, but he's had the track record. So absolutely, Eric Kendricks, keep an eye on him in the offseason. Awesome. Well, we talked about free agent offense, free agent defense. Steve, is there anything else you'd like to tell our viewers and listeners before we sign off?
Not a whole lot. So again, if you guys haven't, I know we talked about the IDP mock draft code for the $1 subscription for the first month. So make sure you guys are doing that and taking advantage of that special. Make sure you're following Johnny Freakin F1 on Twitter. Follow myself on Twitter, @joes_FF. Make sure you read our articles. We've got a lot of content going through on the website on idpplus.com. A lot of great content there. Doing all kinds of mock drafts. We're doing a free agency show next week, which is going to be exciting. I'll see you guys for that. I'll be obviously with Johnny next week for our next Trends episode. So if you guys are looking for anything football, I know March Madness is starting. I know we've got baseball season starting. You got playoffs starting soon for hockey and NBA before you know it. But if you're still itching for some football content, we've got stuff going on constantly right before the NFL draft. So again, make sure you get all the news you can from us. We'll be keeping you guys up to date. There's a lot of great content creators for this platform. I'm sure there's somebody you're following that is part of the IDP family that helps you guys out with your team. So make sure you guys are ready for that, because once April's here and the draft is here, there's going to be some amazing stuff coming down the pipeline and getting you ready for the off season and really training camp. So make sure you guys are following along.
Thanks, Steve. Absolutely. If you haven't given us a follow already, I am Johnny at Johnny Freakin F1. He is Steve at AverageJoes_FF. We will see you next time. Bless up. Peace.